Have you ever experienced that uncanny moment when the world outside seems to echo what's stirring in your inner life? You think of someone you haven't seen for years, and suddenly they appear in your inbox. You dream of a symbol, perhaps a bird, a flower, or a number, and the very next day that same symbol confronts you in waking reality. At first glance, it feels like chance, a quirk of probability. Yet in those moments, your whole body senses something more, as if the universe itself whispered back to your soul. Carl Jung called this mysterious phenomenon synchronicity. The most famous example comes not from abstract theory, but from Jung's consulting room, in the midst of an intense session with a patient. The woman before him was intelligent, skeptical, and difficult to reach on an emotional level. For weeks, she had resisted the transformative work of analysis, keeping herself armored behind rational arguments. Jung listened as she recounted a dream she had the night before. In the dream, she was given a piece of gold jewelry shaped like a scarab beetle, a symbol of rebirth and transformation in ancient Egypt. As she described this image, Jung sensed that something powerful was stirring beneath her defenses. At that very moment, a tapping noise came from the window behind him. Jung turned, opened the window, and caught an insect in his hand. To his astonishment, it was a scarabaeid beetle, a golden scarab-like creature rarely seen in that region, especially at that time of year. Jung presented it to his patient, saying, "Here is your scarab." The woman was so struck by the coincidence that her rigid skepticism cracked. In that instant, the symbolic and the material converged, and a door opened for genuine transformation. For Jung, this was not a trivial oddity or a parlor story to amuse colleagues. It was living proof that the psyche and the world outside are not sealed off from one another. There are moments when inner meaning finds expression through outer events, bound not by chains of cause and effect, but by threads of significance. The Scarab Incident became a cornerstone of his exploration of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that bypass causality and yet carry undeniable resonance. Think for a moment about what such an event suggests. Had the woman merely dreamed of a scarab, the symbol might have stayed locked in her private imagination. Had the beetle merely appeared, it would have been a curious insect, nothing more. But together, the dream and the arrival of the beetle, these two realities mirrored one another, creating a crack in ordinary perception. Something larger was speaking. Jung often insisted that the psyche is not contained solely within our skulls. It participates in a larger field of reality. The scarab event was like a bolt of lightning illuminating that field. When Jung recounted this story in his writings, he was well aware that skeptics would dismiss it as chance. After all, rare insects do appear from time to time. But to stop there, he argued, is to miss the deeper point. Synchronicity is not about measuring probabilities. It is about recognizing the presence of meaning. Just as a dream can feel subjectively charged with significance, so too can an external event strike the psyche with the power of symbol. The fact that it happens in the world, rather than in the mind, makes it all the more striking. Imagine yourself as that patient. You sit in a quiet room, speaking about a dream, certain that the analyst across from you cannot break through your shield of rationality. Then suddenly, the symbol in your story becomes flesh, buzzing at the window, carried in the palm of his hand. Would you not feel as if some invisible intelligence were arranging events? Would you not pause and reconsider the limits of coincidence? For Jung, that pause was crucial. It was the crack through which transformation enters a human life. Synchronicity, then, is not a theory born from abstraction. It arises from lived moments where inner and outer mirror one another. The Scarab Incident remains the most vivid illustration, but it is only one among many Jung recorded. He noticed again and again that when the psyche is at a threshold, when someone is struggling to change, to awaken, or to break through an impasse, the outer world seems to align itself with the inner drama. Symbols migrate from the unconscious into the environment, like actors stepping onto a stage. It is no surprise that this idea stirred controversy. To the scientific mindset of his time, the universe was a vast machine, grinding forward in chains of cause and effect. For something to happen, there had to be a physical trigger. But here was Jung, suggesting that events could connect through meaning rather than mechanism, as though reality itself had a symbolic dimension. This made him sound less like a psychiatrist and more like a mystic. Yet Jung did not shy away. He knew that human experience often defies the narrow frame of mechanical causality, and he was determined to give language to that mystery. As we move deeper into the story of synchronicity, keep the scarab in mind. It is not merely an insect. It is a living emblem of how psyche and cosmos sometimes move in unison. The moment you recognize such an echo in your own life, the boundary between inner and outer begins to blur. Life feels less like a random sequence of events and more like a woven tapestry, where threads cross at precisely the right moment to reveal a hidden design. So when Jung placed that beetle into his patient's hand, he was not just handing over an insect. He was placing into her palm the evidence that life speaks a secret language, a language written not in words, but in coincidences. And in hearing that language, she could no longer cling to pure rationalism. She was confronted by mystery, and in that confrontation, she was changed. This first story sets the stage for everything that follows. Synchronicity begins here, in the shock of recognition, when an outer event mirrors the depths of the soul. As we continue, we will ask, how does this phenomenon differ from ordinary chance? What makes synchronicity more than mere luck? To answer that, we step into the next chapter of Jung's vision. To grasp the essence of synchronicity, we need to pause and examine what it is not. At first glance, it is tempting to confuse these meaningful alignments with mere luck, coincidence, or statistical probability. After all, every day, thousands of chance events unfold without any deeper meaning. People flip coins, bump into acquaintances, or stumble upon songs on the radio. These happen, but most of them pass unnoticed, leaving no echo in the psyche. Synchronicity, however, carries a weight that ordinary coincidence lacks. It feels charged, as if the universe itself tilted slightly to send a message. Carl Jung insisted that synchronicity cannot be reduced to chance because of the way it seizes the whole of consciousness. Ordinary luck is light, passing, forgettable. Synchronicity lodges in memory, haunting us long after the event. Consider the difference between missing your bus and suddenly meeting the very person who can help you in a life crisis because of that delay. Both are accidents, but only one feels drenched in meaning. The distinction lies not in the mechanics of probability, but in the resonance with the inner state of the experiencer. This resonance is crucial. Jung argued that synchronicity is a causal connecting principle. Events are not linked by cause and effect, but by significance. They form a bridge between the inner world of thoughts, dreams, and emotions, and the outer world of events and encounters. When these two streams converge, when the inside and outside mirror one another, we experience that jolt of recognition that ordinary coincidence never produces. Think of it as the difference between rolling dice and receiving an answer to a silent prayer. The first is random. The second feels like dialogue. Synchronicity, in Jung's vision, is a kind of dialogue between psyche and cosmos. The scarab story reveals this vividly. The insect was not caused by the dream, nor did the dream cause the insect to appear. Yet the two came together in perfect timing, like two notes striking harmony in a larger composition. Skeptics often argue that the human mind is predisposed to see patterns, even where none exist. They say we stitch together unrelated events and read into them meanings that are not there. Jung was aware of this objection, yet he pushed back, reminding us that the psyche's sense of meaning is not an error to be dismissed, but a faculty to be understood. Just as the eye perceives light and the ear perceives sound, the soul perceives significance. The question, then, is not whether synchronicities really happen, they clearly do, but whether we are willing to expand our concept of reality to include this a causal order. When we pay attention, the difference between accident and synchronicity becomes clearer. Coincidence is often empty. It does not change us. Synchronicity, by contrast, has a transformative effect. It halts us in our tracks, fills us with awe, sometimes even rearranges the course of our lives. People move across the country because of one uncanny meeting, or choose a new vocation after a dream and an outer sign align on the same day. The meaningfulness is what gives the event its power, and what marks it apart from random chance. This is why Jung insisted that synchronicity cannot be studied with statistics alone. To treat it as probability misses its living essence. Numbers may explain frequencies, but they do not capture the way an event seizes the heart. He compared it to the difference between counting musical notes and actually hearing a symphony. Meaning belongs to a dimension deeper than calculation. In your own life, think of moments when events seemed to align too perfectly. Perhaps you were wrestling with a decision, and a stranger's casual remark gave you clarity. Perhaps you were grieving, and a symbol meaningful only to you appeared in the world outside, as if in gentle reassurance. These experiences do not feel like accidents, even if probability can argue otherwise. They feel as if life itself is participating in your inner journey. That sense of participation is the hallmark of synchronicity. By separating synchronicity from ordinary coincidence, Jung was doing more than playing with semantics. He was inviting us to recognize that reality is layered. On the surface, events follow causal laws, measurable and predictable. Beneath that surface, however, flows another kind of order, an order of meaning, not mechanism. When we glimpse this order, the rigid walls between inner and outer dissolve, and life begins to look like a woven tapestry rather than a mechanical chain. This is the subtle yet profound distinction that carries us forward. To understand synchronicity, we must go beyond the mathematics of chance into the mystery of meaning. The scarab story was a doorway. Now the challenge is to see how these meaningful patterns appear again and again in the unfolding of life, guiding us like signs along a hidden path. And so the next step in Jung's exploration is to follow these patterns, to see how symbols and life events connect in ways that cannot be explained by probability alone. These patterns of meaning, often subtle, shape the very way synchronicity touches the human soul. Once we step beyond the idea of random chance, we begin to notice something extraordinary. Life has a way of arranging events so they form patterns of meaning. These are not mechanical patterns, like the gears of a clock, but symbolic ones, like threads of an invisible design. Carl Jung often described synchronicity as the appearance of parallel events that weave together inner and outer realities. Dreams, symbols, and waking experiences suddenly converge, creating a tapestry where every stitch seems deliberate. Take the scarab story once more. It wasn't simply a case of an insect appearing at an odd moment. It was the pattern, the patient's dream of the scarab, Jung's attentive listening, and the sudden arrival of the beetle that created significance. Each element by itself was unremarkable, but together they formed a meaningful whole. Jung believed that this was how synchronicity revealed itself, not through isolated events, but through patterns that resonate with the unconscious. Such patterns often revolve around archetypes, the universal images and motifs stored within the collective unconscious. These are the symbols that appear in myths, religions, and dreams across cultures. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the shadow. When synchronicities occur, they frequently involve these timeless archetypal themes. For example, someone wrestling with personal transformation may encounter repeated symbols of death and rebirth in dreams, in books they happen to pick up, in conversations overheard, or in the chance encounter with a butterfly or phoenix image. Each appearance feels connected, as if reality itself is echoing the archetypal journey within. To Jung, this was no trivial curiosity. The psyche is symbolic by nature. Our inner life speaks through images, metaphors, and narratives. When those same symbols appear outside of us in the physical world, they create a pattern that feels uncanny. It is as if the world itself becomes a dream, offering hints and reflections of what stirs inside. This mirroring is what gives synchronicity its transformative power. It tells us, your inner process is not private. It is part of a larger order. Think of times in your own life when you've seen repeating themes. Maybe the same phrase shows up in multiple books you read in a week, or a particular number appears again and again in unlikely places, right as you are wrestling with a decision. The rational mind may call it confirmation bias, but the soul experiences it differently. To the soul, it feels like recognition, as though reality is highlighting what truly matters in that moment. Jung collected countless reports of these experiences. Patients described dreams that predicted encounters, or thoughts that were answered by unexpected letters or visits. In one famous case, Jung was traveling and found himself discussing the motif of fish with a colleague. Within days, fish appeared in his meals, in conversations, even as a literal object pressed into his hand as a gift. For Jung, the repetition was striking. The archetypal symbol of fish, long associated with renewal, transformation, and the unconscious, surfaced in a flood of synchronicities, as if to underline the theme with bold strokes. These patterns of meaning are what distinguish synchronicity from chance. Random accidents do not form coherent narratives. Synchronicities, however, cluster around significance, creating constellations of meaning that shape a person's inner and outer life simultaneously. It is this clustering that makes them so hard to ignore. When multiple events all point in the same symbolic direction, the probability of mere coincidence fades into insignificance, and we are left with the impression of a hidden hand guiding the pattern. Why does this matter? Because humans are meaning-seeking creatures. We are not satisfied with a universe of blind accidents. We look for story, purpose, coherence. Synchronicity feeds this hunger by showing us that meaning is not just a projection of the mind. It is embedded in the very fabric of events. Life, Jung suggested, is not only causal, it is also symbolic. We live not just in a physical environment, but in a field of meaning, where events can answer the soul's deepest questions. Imagine walking through life as if through a great woven cloth. Most days, you see only fragments of thread, but once in a while, the weave reveals itself. Suddenly, you see how the colors align, how the shapes echo one another, how every strand participates in a larger design. That glimpse changes everything. Synchronicity is such a glimpse. It opens a window into the meaningful patterning that underlies existence. Of course, these patterns are not always gentle. Sometimes they confront us with shadow material, parts of ourselves we would rather ignore. A person who denies their anger may repeatedly meet it in others, through coincidences that force them to face what lies buried. In this way, synchronicity becomes not just magical, but therapeutic. It serves as a mirror, urging us to integrate what the unconscious is trying to bring into awareness. The true power of synchronicity lies here, in its ability to arrange inner and outer events into a meaningful whole, nudging us toward growth. It is not about predicting lottery numbers or defying physics. It is about alignment, an alignment so striking that it jolts us into awareness of the psyche's dialogue with the cosmos. As Jung explored these patterns, he sought allies who could help him bridge psychology with other fields. One of the most fascinating alliances was with the Nobel Prize-winning physicist Wolfgang Pauli, who shared his conviction that the psyche and the physical world were mysteriously interconnected. Their collaboration would take the exploration of synchronicity into new depths, uniting psychology with quantum physics and pushing the boundaries of both. That is where our journey next turns. The story of synchronicity does not belong to Jung alone. At a certain point, his exploration found an unexpected companion in the world of physics, Nobel laureate Wolfgang Pauli. Pauli was not just any physicist. He was one of the key architects of quantum theory, a thinker whose mind probed the deepest mysteries of matter. Yet behind his brilliance lay a troubled psyche, haunted by inner turmoil, dreams, and a hunger for meaning that science alone could not satisfy. His encounter with Jung marked the beginning of a collaboration that would bridge two seemingly distant realms, psychology and physics. Pauli sought Jung's help in the 1930s, following a series of personal crises. His marriage had collapsed, his emotional life was in chaos, and his dreams were flooded with vivid, sometimes terrifying imagery. For a physicist trained in precision and logic, these nocturnal visions were bewildering. Yet Pauli felt they contained truths he could not ignore. He turned to Jung, who was renowned not only for his theories, but for his openness to the symbolic dimension of the psyche. Jung quickly realized that Pauli's dreams were extraordinary. They overflowed with archetypal images, mandalas, mythological figures, cosmic patterns. Jung studied them with awe, recognizing in Pauli's unconscious a natural attunement to the symbolic order he had long described. The two men began to exchange ideas, and soon their relationship evolved beyond analyst and patient into a profound intellectual dialogue. Jung found in Pauli not only a brilliant mind, but a partner willing to contemplate the possibility that psyche and matter are woven together. The collaboration centered on a daring question. Could synchronicity represent a principle that unites inner and outer worlds, bridging psychology and physics? For Jung, synchronicity had always pointed beyond personal psychology. It hinted at an underlying order that connected events through meaning rather than mechanism. For Pauli, who was immersed in the paradoxes of quantum physics, the idea resonated. After all, quantum theory itself revealed a universe that defied classical causality, where particles could influence each other at a distance, and outcomes seemed to depend on observation. Together, they entertained the possibility that synchronicity and quantum phenomena might be reflections of the same underlying reality, a deeper level where psyche and matter are not separate, but complementary aspects of one field. Jung spoke of the unus mundus, the one world, a term borrowed from medieval alchemy. Pauli, with his scientific rigor, appreciated the metaphor and sought ways to articulate it without reducing it to superstition. This alliance was not without tension. Pauli, despite his openness, remained a scientist who valued empirical grounding. Jung, despite his symbolic vision, wished to avoid reducing synchronicity to physics, yet in their exchange, both found fertile ground. Pauli provided Jung with a vocabulary of quantum complementarity, uncertainty, and non-locality. Jung gave Pauli a symbolic framework to interpret the flood of archetypal dreams that haunted him. Each enriched the other, and their correspondence, spanning hundreds of letters, remains one of the most fascinating dialogues between psychology and science in the 20th century. Why does this matter? Because the partnership demonstrated that synchronicity was not just a poetic idea, it touched questions at the heart of reality. If quantum physics showed that the universe is not fully deterministic, but instead reveals a realm of potentiality shaped by observation, then perhaps meaning itself has a place in the fabric of existence. Jung and Pauli dared to suggest that psyche and matter might be two sides of one coin, and synchronicity was the crack through which that unity revealed itself. For Jung, Pauli's dreams served as a living laboratory. He marveled at how a man immersed in abstract physics could simultaneously generate symbolic images of mandalas, geometrical forms long associated with wholeness, order, and cosmic harmony. Pauli's unconscious seemed to be working on the same problems as his waking mind, but in the language of myth rather than mathematics. This duality convinced Jung that synchronicity was not confined to anecdotes like the scarab. It was an expression of a universal principle linking inner and outer realities. Pauli himself grew convinced that the line between mind and matter was more porous than science admitted. He once remarked that Jung had opened his eyes to the symbolic dimensions of his own discipline. In return, Jung acknowledged that Pauli's scientific insights had pushed him to frame synchronicity not as mystical speculation, but as a principle worthy of serious consideration. Their collaboration, though not a formal research project, seeded a fertile dialogue that continues to inspire thinkers today who seek to integrate psychology, physics, and spirituality. Imagine, then, the audacity of their vision. Two men, one rooted in the mysteries of the unconscious, the other in the enigmas of quantum theory, stood together on the edge of knowledge, suggesting that psyche and cosmos might be mirrors of one another. In that mirror, synchronicity appeared not as superstition, but as evidence of a deeper order, an order where meaning is woven into the fabric of reality itself. This partnership between Jung and Pauli remains one of the most daring attempts to bridge science and soul. It showed that synchronicity is not just a curiosity for therapists and dreamers, but a principle with implications for how we understand the very nature of existence. As their dialogue unfolded, Jung began to explore more deeply how dreams and symbols function as the gateways through which synchronicity often reveals itself, a theme that draws us into the next chapter. Dreams have always been the royal road into the unconscious, but for Jung, they were more than inner stories told in the night. Dreams were alive with symbols, and those symbols often spilled over into waking life in the form of synchronicities. If synchronicity was the bridge between psyche and cosmos, then dreams were the language written on that bridge. They provided the inner imagery that could suddenly be echoed, answered, or embodied by events in the external world. The Scarab story remains the clearest demonstration of this. The dream symbol of the scarab appeared in the patient's psyche, and then the beetle itself appeared in physical reality, breaking through her skepticism and opening her to transformation. That was not an isolated occurrence. Again and again, Jung noticed that the most charged synchronicities had their roots in dreams. The dream planted a symbol into the unconscious, and then reality responded with a mirror. Why should this be so? Jung believed that dreams emerge from the same archetypal layers of the psyche that shape myth and religion. They carry universal images: the sun as source of life, the river as flow of time, the tree as axis of growth. When such symbols appear in dreams, they touch something timeless. When they also appear in outer events, the effect is multiplied, as though the universe itself acknowledges the dream's significance. It is no longer just an image from within. It is a sign confirmed without. This duality transforms how we experience dreams. A dream can feel fleeting when it remains in the private theater of sleep. But when reality echoes it, the dream acquires weight. It feels as if the dream was not simply personal imagination, but part of a larger order, one that anticipated or arranged outer events. Jung described this as a moment when the boundary between subjective and objective reality dissolves, revealing the psyche's participation in the greater cosmos. For those who have lived such moments, the effect is unforgettable. Imagine dreaming of a specific bird, and then waking to find that bird perched outside your window, staring directly at you. Or dreaming of an encounter with a friend, and the next day, without planning, you run into them in the most unlikely place. In these instances, the dream feels less like a memory of the night and more like a message encoded into the fabric of existence. Jung collected many accounts from patients in which dream symbols synchronized with outer reality. Some dreamed of numbers that later appeared on critical documents. Others dreamed of specific landscapes they later encountered by accident. In these cases, the dream was not predicting the future in the mechanical sense of prophecy. Rather, it was opening the psyche to a field of meaning, one that would later be confirmed by lived events. The dream provided the inner half of the symbol, and synchronicity supplied the outer half. What is remarkable is the precision with which these symbolic connections often manifest. Jung once analyzed a man who repeatedly dreamed of circular images, mandalas, wheels, and spheres. These symbols of wholeness arose during a time when the man was striving for psychological integration. Then, in waking life, he was repeatedly confronted by circular patterns, strange coincidences of clocks, round windows, and even an accidental spill of coffee forming a perfect circle. The repetition struck him deeply, convincing him that his unconscious journey toward wholeness was mirrored by the world around him. Dreams also provide a context for why certain events feel meaningful. If you had never dreamed of a scarab, the appearance of a beetle might not touch you. If you had never dreamed of circles, seeing them in daily life might not matter. Dreams prepare the ground. They shape the inner readiness so that when the outer event occurs, it resonates. Synchronicity depends not only on the external coincidence, but on the inner state that gives it meaning. This is why Jung emphasized keeping a record of dreams. By paying attention to them, we become attuned to the symbols that the unconscious is working with. Then, when synchronicities occur, we recognize them. Without that inner awareness, the event might pass as a trivial accident. But with it, we see the dialogue between psyche and cosmos. Dreams, in this way, are like lanterns illuminating the symbols that reality may soon bring to life. The bond between dreams and synchronicity also underscores a profound truth. Our unconscious is not isolated. It is not sealed in the skull, but participates in the currents of the world. Dreams emerge from that deeper layer of mind, and synchronicities reveal how that layer is connected to external reality. Together, they show us that psyche and cosmos are woven into one fabric, stitched together by meaning. As Jung continued to explore this, he saw that dreams were not just individual phenomena. They were also expressions of collective symbols, archetypes that belong to humanity as a whole. And it is in that collective dimension, the vast ocean beneath our personal minds, that synchronicity often draws its deepest power. From the scarab to the mandala, from fish to circles, the archetypal realm provides the shared stage upon which meaningful coincidences unfold. That is where we must now turn. When Jung spoke of synchronicity, he often emphasized that it could not be understood fully without reference to the collective unconscious. This was his great and daring idea, that beneath our personal memories and private minds lies a deeper layer shared by all of humanity. In this realm, archetypes dwell, timeless images and motifs that shape myths, dreams, and stories across cultures. They are the primordial patterns of the psyche, and they form the soil in which synchronicity takes root. Archetypes are not just abstract concepts. They are living forces that shape perception, imagination, and emotion. The hero who battles darkness, the mother who nurtures, the shadow that haunts us, the wise old man who guides, all of these appear not only in myths, but in the dreams and fantasies of individuals across the world. They are the universal language of the psyche. When synchronicities occur, they often do so through the activation of these archetypes. Think of Jung's patient with the scarab dream. The scarab is not only an insect. In ancient Egypt, it symbolized rebirth, renewal, and the eternal cycle of life. By appearing both in her dream and in waking reality, the scarab linked her personal transformation to an archetypal theme of resurrection. It was not a random insect. It was a symbol from the collective unconscious made flesh. This is what gave the moment its shattering power. The collective unconscious explains why synchronicities often feel so charged. When events resonate with archetypes, they stir something older and larger than the individual. A chance meeting that echoes the archetype of the lover, a repeating symbol that awakens the archetype of the journey, or a confrontation that embodies the archetype of the shadow. Each of these transcends the personal. They feel as though life itself is speaking in mythic language. Jung observed this repeatedly in his clinical practice. Patients would report synchronicities that mirrored mythological themes, even when they had no conscious knowledge of those myths. A woman might dream of descending into darkness, only to find herself encountering a series of life events that echoed the archetypal descent into the underworld. A man might dream of floods, and then experience external events of overwhelming chaos, symbolically resonant with the flood myths found in cultures worldwide. These patterns revealed that synchronicity was not simply personal luck, but participation in a larger symbolic drama shared by humanity. Consider how this might feel in your own life. You face a time of crisis, and suddenly images of death and rebirth flood your dreams. Soon after, you encounter outer signs, a phoenix in art, conversations about renewal, or a literal rebirth in your family or community. The inner and outer align, not because of direct causality, but because the archetype of transformation is active. The collective unconscious, stirred within you, is mirrored by the world outside. In that reflection, you sense the presence of something greater than yourself. This idea also clarifies why synchronicities often arrive at moments of profound change. Archetypes surface most powerfully at thresholds: marriage, birth, loss, midlife crisis, spiritual awakening. These are the moments when the individual is closest to the archetypal ground, when personal stories blend with universal myths. Synchronicities then appear like sparks, signaling that the deeper layers of the psyche are alive and in dialogue with the cosmos. Skeptics might argue that this is projection, that we impose myth onto events. But Jung would reply, myths are not inventions, they are discoveries. They arise spontaneously from the depths of the unconscious, repeating across time and culture. When synchronicities mirror them, We are not imposing meaning, but perceiving the hidden architecture of reality. Archetypes are the blueprints, and synchronicities are the moments when the blueprint reveals itself in both dream and matter. It is here that the mystical character of synchronicity becomes clear. For Jung, it was not enough to explain them as statistical oddities. The resonance with archetypes showed that synchronicity was woven into the very structure of psyche and cosmos. The same patterns that shape myths and dreams shape the unfolding of events. This is why synchronicities often feel as though they are scripted, as if life momentarily becomes a myth playing itself out through you. To live with this awareness is to see existence differently. You begin to notice that behind the surface of chance lies an archetypal stage. Characters enter your life at just the right moment. Symbols repeat, and events weave together like scenes in a story. You are no longer a solitary individual lost in randomness. You are part of humanity's timeless myth, and synchronicity is the sign that the myth is alive in you. Jung believed that this was not only psychologically healing, but spiritually profound. The recognition that our lives participate in archetypal patterns restores a sense of meaning, purpose, and connection. It tells us that the psyche is not isolated, but interwoven with the whole of humanity, and ultimately, with the cosmos itself. Synchronicity is not superstition. It is the shimmering of archetypes across the boundary of inner and outer worlds. From here, the question naturally arises. When do these archetypal synchronicities tend to appear most vividly in our lives? Jung noticed that they often cluster around moments of transition, times when a person's old life is collapsing and a new one is struggling to be born. These turning points, saturated with archetypal energy, attract synchronicities like magnets. And it is to these moments of transformation that we must now turn our attention. Throughout Jung's observations, one theme appeared again and again. Synchronicities erupt most forcefully at moments of transformation. When a person is at a crossroads, when old ways of being are collapsing and something new is struggling to emerge, meaningful coincidences seem to gather like storm clouds, punctuating the air with electric signs. These events are not gentle background noise. They often feel like catalysts, jolting the individual toward change. Consider once more the Scarab Incident. Jung's patient was locked in rigid rationalism, unwilling to open herself to the deeper dimensions of psyche. The sudden arrival of the beetle shattered her defenses. It was not only coincidence, it was the symbol of rebirth intruding at the very moment her old framework needed to crack. That event became a hinge in her therapy, a turning point where transformation became possible. Jung realized this was no anomaly. Again and again, patients reported synchronicities precisely when their lives hung in the balance, at moments of death, love, crisis, or awakening. One man, despairing after a great personal loss, dreamt of water overflowing its banks. The next day, a pipe burst in his home, flooding the floor. To him, this was not mere accident. It was a mirror of his grief spilling into the world. The synchronicity shocked him into recognizing the depth of his pain, a recognition that marked the beginning of healing. Why do such events cluster at thresholds? Jung believed it was because the unconscious becomes most active when the conscious mind falters. During stable times, our lives run on habit, and little breaks through. But when we stand on the edge, facing endings, beginnings, or crises, the unconscious surges upward, bringing archetypal images and energy with it. These images then echo in the external world, forming synchronicities that press the meaning of the moment into consciousness. This is why so many people encounter uncanny coincidences during times of illness, heartbreak, or spiritual awakening. A woman battling cancer may find herself surrounded by symbols of rebirth. Butterflies, spring blossoms, phoenix images. A man considering a dramatic career change might suddenly encounter multiple strangers who all mention the very path he is contemplating. These events feel orchestrated, as if the universe itself conspires to underline the significance of the moment. They are not commands from outside, but reflections of the inner transformation that is underway. Jung often described synchronicity as the psyche's way of declaring, "Pay attention, something important is happening." In the midst of transformation, synchronicities amplify the message. They seize our attention, insisting that we cannot return to old ways. This insistence can be unsettling. To feel guided, even compelled, by events beyond causality is to confront the mystery of existence directly. Yet for those willing to listen, synchronicity becomes not an intrusion, but a companion, an assurance that the journey has meaning, even if its destination is unclear. Transformation is rarely smooth. It often involves the death of one identity and the painful birth of another. Synchronicities, by appearing at these moments, act like beacons. They illuminate the path just enough to keep us moving. They do not provide the whole map, but they reassure us that we are not wandering blindly. Jung compared this to ancient initiatory rites, where symbols and sacred dramas guided initiates through death and rebirth. In modern life, synchronicities often serve a similar role, reminding us that our suffering and change are part of a larger pattern. Have you ever noticed how, during a personal crisis, life seems to send messages tailored just for you? A book falls off a shelf with precisely the wisdom you needed. A stranger says words that answer a question you have never voiced aloud. A song plays at the exact moment it can pierce your heart. In calmer times, such events might slip by unnoticed, but in the crucible of transformation, they blaze with significance. They tell us we are on the threshold of a new life. For Jung, this was not superstition, but psychological necessity. Without symbols and signs, transformation feels like chaos. With them, it becomes initiation. Synchronicity thus serves as a bridge, carrying us from breakdown to breakthrough, from loss to renewal. It assures us that the turbulence of change is not meaningless, but woven into the archetypal fabric of existence. As Jung traced these moments, he realized that synchronicity often evokes a peculiar sensation, the feeling that we are being guided. Not in the sense of a puppeteer pulling strings, but in the subtler sense of life unfolding with uncanny timing, as though an invisible intelligence accompanies us. To explore this feeling of destiny, guidance, or being led, we must move deeper into the heart of synchronicity. If synchronicity strikes most powerfully at moments of transformation, what does it actually feel like? Again and again, people who encounter it describe the same sensation, the uncanny impression of being guided, not controlled, not coerced, but gently steered, as though an unseen hand has placed just the right person, event, or symbol in their path. Jung himself noticed how often synchronicity produced this numinous feeling, a mixture of awe, humility, and certainty that the universe is speaking directly to one's life. Consider the scarab once more. For Jung's patient, the arrival of the beetle was not just startling, it carried the sense that something larger was at work. The timing was too precise, the resonance too deep. She felt as if life itself had intervened in her therapy, nudging her toward the very breakthrough she resisted. This is the essence of synchronicity. It carries not only coincidence, but conviction. It persuades the soul that it is not wandering alone in a meaningless void. This feeling of guidance often arises in the most ordinary settings. A man uncertain about leaving his job walks into a bookstore. and a book practically falls into his hands with a title addressing his very dilemma. A woman grieving the loss of a parent hears a song on the radio whose lyrics mirror her private pain, as if offering comfort. A student struggling with identity meets a mentor by pure chance who speaks the words they most needed to hear. These are not grand miracles. They are intimate alignments. Yet their impact is profound because of the way they pierce the heart at precisely the right moment. Jung pointed out that synchronicity is deeply tied to what he called the numinous, that quality of experience that feels holy, awe-inspiring, or saturated with meaning. Even skeptics, when describing powerful synchronicities, often admit to feeling a chill down the spine or a sense of being momentarily lifted out of ordinary time. The experience whispers, "This matters." It is this whisper of significance that makes synchronicity different from random coincidence. For some, the feeling of guidance can resemble destiny. Events line up with such precision that they seem orchestrated, as though life has been waiting for this very moment. But Jung was careful here. He did not claim that an external deity or cosmic puppeteer is arranging every detail. Rather, he suggested that psyche and world share a deeper order, and when they align, it feels as if destiny is at play. The experience of guidance is the psyche's recognition of that alignment. This sense of being guided can be transformative in itself. People often describe synchronicities as turning points, moments when they felt encouraged to take a leap they had feared, or reassured that their suffering was not meaningless. The guidance may not dictate exact choices, but it provides the courage to move forward. It is less like a map and more like a compass needle, orienting us toward meaning. Jung believed this feeling was vital for psychological growth. Without it, we may drift through life convinced that everything is random, that our struggles are empty. With it, we feel woven into a larger story, one where our choices and experiences participate in a deeper coherence. The conviction that life is speaking to me brings both responsibility and wonder. Responsibility, because we must listen and respond. Wonder, because the message comes not in thunder but in delicate whispers, symbols, coincidences, uncanny timings. Skeptics might say this is illusion, a projection of desire onto chance. Yet to dismiss the feeling of guidance is to miss its effect. Jung argued that psychological truth is not measured only by external proof, but by transformative power. If synchronicity changes the way we live, if it strengthens our courage or deepens our awe, then it carries reality for the psyche. And for Jung, the psyche was as real as any physical object. Think of your own life. Can you recall a moment when everything aligned too perfectly to ignore? Perhaps you felt as if someone or something wanted you to notice, to pause, to take a different path. That feeling, fleeting as it may be, stays with you. It lingers long after the event, whispering that meaning surrounds you in ways the rational mind cannot explain. That whisper is the voice of synchronicity. From here, the question grows larger. If synchronicity feels like guidance, where does it place us in the debate between science and spirituality? Does it belong only to psychology, or does it point toward a mystical dimension of existence? To follow Jung's path, we must enter this tension between science, which demands causality, and mysticism, which embraces meaning. Synchronicity sits uncomfortably between the two, defying categories, inviting us to rethink the nature of reality itself. From the beginning, synchronicity unsettled the scientific world. Psychology at the time of Jung was striving for respectability, eager to prove itself a rigorous science. It wanted to anchor itself in measurement, statistics, and causal explanations. Into this landscape, Jung introduced an idea that seemed to dissolve the very foundation of causality, that events could be connected not by cause and effect, but by meaning. To his critics, this was mysticism smuggled into science. To Jung, it was the truth of lived experience, and he refused to ignore it. The resistance was fierce. Many of Jung's contemporaries feared that talk of meaningful coincidences would reduce psychology to superstition. After all, science depends on the principle that every event has a cause. Remove that, and you open the door to magical thinking. Jung knew this objection well, yet he argued that synchronicity did not replace causality, it supplemented it. The world was not only causal, it was also acausal. Just as light can be understood as both wave and particle, reality might operate with dual principles, cause and meaning. The collaboration with Wolfgang Pauli gave weight to this view. Pauli, immersed in quantum physics, recognized that even the physical world defied strict determinism. Quantum phenomena revealed uncertainty, complementarity, and non-local connections that baffled classical science. Jung pointed to these as analogies, suggesting that just as physics had to expand its categories, so too must psychology. Synchronicity, he claimed, was to psychology what quantum theory was to physics, an invitation to expand beyond linear causality into a deeper, more mysterious order. Still, the language Jung used, archetypes, symbols, numinous experiences, placed him closer to the mystics than to laboratory scientists. He himself admitted as much. Synchronicity blurred the line between psychology and spirituality, because it dealt not only with inner states, but with the way reality itself seemed to participate in human meaning. For many, this was precisely what made Jung dangerous. He refused to confine psyche to the brain or to dismiss spiritual experience as illusion. Instead, he dared to say that the psyche and cosmos were interwoven, and synchronicity was one of the threads tying them together. This bridging of science and mysticism explains why Jung continues to attract seekers far beyond the academy. For spiritual traditions, synchronicity resonates with long-held beliefs that signs, omens, and meaningful encounters are ways the divine communicates. For mystics, it confirmed what they always knew, that life speaks through symbols. Jung's genius was to articulate this in psychological terms without reducing it to dogma. He gave modern people permission to take their uncanny experiences seriously, not as superstition, but as glimpses into a hidden dimension of reality. And yet, he did not abandon critical rigor. Jung warned that not every coincidence is a synchronicity. The test lies in the resonance with the inner state, the transformative impact, the archetypal depth. Without these, a coincidence is just noise. With them, it becomes music. In this way, Jung insisted on discernment, balancing openness to mystery with respect for psychological discipline. The tension between science and mysticism is not a flaw in synchronicity. It is its essence. The phenomenon lives on the borderlands, refusing to be captured by one worldview alone. This is precisely why it continues to fascinate. It pushes the rational mind to its limits and invites the intuitive mind to listen. In the scarab, in the uncanny dream, in the perfect timing of life events, we are confronted with something that cannot be measured but cannot be denied. This is why Jung saw synchronicity as a bridge. On one side stands science, with its insistence on causality. On the other stands mysticism, with its embrace of meaning. Synchronicity does not ask us to choose but to hold both, to accept that reality may be richer than either framework allows. To live with this paradox is not to escape into superstition, but to acknowledge that human experience is vast, layered, and sometimes irreducibly mysterious. For Jung, This was not an academic debate. He saw how synchronicity changed lives. Patients who encountered it felt less alone, more connected, more willing to see their struggles as part of a larger story. Scientists like Pauli found in it a mirror of the mysteries they were already confronting in matter. Seekers found in it validation of their intuition, that life is not random but meaningful. The boundary between science and mysticism blurred, and through that blur emerged a deeper vision of reality. As we continue, we must bring this vision closer to daily life. Beyond scarabs, archetypes, and debates, how do synchronicities appear in the ordinary rhythm of our days? What happens when the universe speaks not in extraordinary symbols, but in the quiet alignments of daily encounters? The next step is to look at everyday examples, moments that remind us that synchronicity is not confined to the extraordinary, but is woven into the fabric of ordinary life itself. It is tempting to think of synchronicity only in terms of extraordinary stories, the scarab beetle, archetypal dreams, dramatic turning points. Yet Jung reminded us that the phenomenon also lives in the fabric of everyday life. In fact, the quiet, ordinary examples are often the most compelling, precisely because they occur without fanfare. They slip into the daily rhythm of existence, reminding us that meaning is not confined to the rare or the mystical, but is always close at hand. Consider the simple experience of thinking about a friend you have not spoken to in years. You remember their voice, their smile, and suddenly, perhaps within minutes, the phone rings, and it is them. On the surface, this can be explained as coincidence. But if, in that moment, the reconnection carries a significance for you, if their call comes just when you are struggling, or just when a memory of them carries weight, then the coincidence shifts into synchronicity. It is not the probability that matters, but the meaningful resonance. Jung himself collected stories of these everyday alignments. A man dreams of an unusual word, and the next day hears it spoken by a stranger in a casual conversation. A woman thinks of a specific song, and within minutes it begins playing on the radio. Another person mulls over a difficult decision, and then, as if scripted, overhears two strangers discussing the very choice they are wrestling with. These events may be small, but they have the same quality of significance that marks synchronicity. They arrive at precisely the right time, carrying the sense of dialogue between psyche and world. Why do such ordinary examples matter? Because they show us that synchronicity is not restricted to the extraordinary or the mystical. It is not a rare miracle, but a natural rhythm of life. It whispers constantly if we learn to listen. Most people have experienced these moments, though many dismiss them as chance. Jung's invitation was to treat them with respect, not as proof of cosmic manipulation, but as glimpses into the meaningful order beneath daily events. The transformative power of everyday synchronicities lies in their intimacy. They do not overwhelm us with awe. They nudge us with gentle precision. You think of forgiveness, and that very day you cross paths with someone you wronged long ago. You wonder if you should pursue a new direction, and the next book you open contains the exact words you needed. These are not accidents in the eyes of the soul. They are alignments that reveal the texture of meaning woven through ordinary days. One of Jung's patients once described a string of small synchronicities while navigating a difficult relationship. She dreamed of keys, then found an old key in the street, and later overheard a conversation about unlocking doors. Each instance alone was trivial, but together they formed a pattern, convincing her that her psyche was urging her toward freedom. The outer world had mirrored her inner need, and through the repetition of symbols, her unconscious delivered a message she could no longer ignore. It is in such everyday examples that we can begin to cultivate sensitivity. By keeping a dream journal, reflecting on symbols that arise, and paying attention to what resonates in daily life, we train ourselves to notice the dialogue between within and without. Synchronicity, then, ceases to be a rare anomaly and becomes a way of perceiving. Life itself begins to appear alive with conversation, as though every encounter carries potential meaning. Of course, not every coincidence is synchronicity. Jung was adamant about this. The key is meaning. If the event resonates with your inner state, if it shifts your perspective, if it leaves you with a sense of awe or clarity, then it has the quality of synchronicity. If it does not, it remains a coincidence. The distinction rests not on probability, but on depth of impact. Perhaps you can recall your own everyday synchronicity, a phrase, a symbol, or an encounter that arrived exactly when needed. Even if it seemed minor, the feeling it carried stayed with you. These moments are like threads, weaving your personal life into a larger tapestry of meaning. And when we step back, we see that this tapestry is not woven by us alone. We participate in something larger, a pattern that involves others as well. This brings us to one of the most profound expressions of synchronicity: the way it shapes relationships. Friendships, romances, encounters with strangers, all are often initiated or deepened through meaningful coincidences. To understand synchronicity in its fullness, we must explore how it weaves human connections, drawing people together in ways that defy explanation yet feel destined. Synchronicity is never merely private. While it often begins with an inner image or a personal dream, its ripple spreads outward into the web of human connection. Jung noticed how frequently meaningful coincidences drew people together, sometimes for brief encounters that changed everything, other times for lifelong bonds. Relationships, whether of friendship, romance, mentorship, or even fleeting meetings, are among the most fertile grounds where synchronicity reveals its guiding hand. Think about the stories people tell of how they met their partners. Again and again, synchronicity plays a role. Two people cross paths in a city neither of them usually visits. A missed train leads to a conversation with a stranger who later becomes indispensable. A chance introduction at a gathering, which one almost skipped, blossoms into a lifelong relationship. These alignments carry the unmistakable feeling of timing, that sense that events arranged themselves in a way no planning could have achieved. Jung himself reflected on how synchronicity often shows up in matters of the heart. He observed that when unconscious archetypes of love and union are stirred, the outer world frequently conspires to bring people together under uncanny circumstances. It is as though the psyche, longing for connection, radiates into the environment and attracts the right encounters. This does not mean we conjure people into existence. Rather, it suggests that the inner readiness for relationship finds its mirror in external coincidence. Consider the story of a young woman Jung once analyzed. She dreamed repeatedly of water and boats, symbols of crossing and union. Shortly afterward, by chance, she was invited to a lakeside trip where she met a man who would become her partner. For her, the synchronicity was undeniable. The dream symbols had spilled into reality, guiding her toward relationship. It was as if the unconscious had prepared her for a connection, and then the outer world delivered it. This pattern is not limited to romance. Friendships, too, are often born through synchronicity. Perhaps you find yourself seated next to a stranger on a plane, and by the end of the flight, you've discovered a kindred spirit who shares not only your interests, but your current struggles. Or you receive an email sent to the wrong address, only to discover that the sender holds the very knowledge you were seeking. These small accidents become seeds of connection, and once they grow, they often feel destined in retrospect. Jung also noticed how synchronicity can play a role in conflict and reconciliation. Sometimes the very person we most need to confront appears at the exact moment avoidance feels easiest. At other times, symbols appear to remind us of unfinished ties. A man estranged from his brother for decades suddenly dreams of reconciliation, and the next day receives a letter from him. Such moments dissolve the illusion that relationships are held together only by conscious effort. They suggest that bonds run deeper, that the unconscious and perhaps the cosmos itself work to weave people together when the time is ripe. Why does synchronicity appear so vividly in relationships? Because relationships are inherently archetypal. They stir the deepest patterns of psyche. The mother, the lover, the friend, the rival, the guide. When these archetypes are activated, the world seems to respond with uncanny timing, offering encounters that dramatize the inner themes. This is why synchronicity in relationships feels so charged. It is not only about meeting another person, but about touching the archetype of union, conflict, or reconciliation that lives in the collective unconscious. For those who experience it, the effect is transformative. Meeting a partner under synchronic circumstances lends the relationship a sense of destiny. Reconnecting with someone through uncanny timing restores a feeling of meaning to life's unfolding. Even fleeting encounters, like a stranger whose words arrive at exactly the right moment, become markers on the soul's journey, guiding us toward growth. Perhaps you have known this yourself. You meet someone by accident, only to discover they were the missing piece you didn't know you needed. Or you part ways with someone, only to cross paths years later under circumstances too perfect to be ignored. These moments remind us that our lives are not isolated threads, but woven into a larger web, where connections form at the right time, in the right way, to advance the story of our growth. In Jung's view, synchronicity in relationships reveals the relational nature of reality itself. Psyche does not unfold in isolation. It is interwoven with others, and synchronicity is the mysterious language through which those interconnections announce themselves. Every bond we form may be more than personal. It may be archetypal, cosmic, part of the great dialogue between soul and world. As we explore these connections, another question emerges. If synchronicity can guide individuals and relationships, can it also be cultivated? Is there a way to open ourselves more fully to these moments of alignment? Jung believed so. By living with awareness, by listening to dreams, by honoring symbols, we can attune ourselves to the subtle currents of synchronicity. The next step is to discover how to open to the unknown, so that life's hidden order reveals itself more often. If synchronicity is real, the next question naturally arises. Can we invite it? Can we live in such a way that these meaningful coincidences become more frequent, more visible, more integrated into our journey? Jung's answer was both simple and profound. Synchronicity cannot be commanded like a machine. It is not under our control. Yet, by cultivating awareness and openness, we create the conditions in which synchronicity can be noticed, recognized, and embraced. The first step is attention. Most synchronicities pass unnoticed because we are distracted, rushing, or unwilling to see meaning beyond the surface. Jung often urged his patients to keep a dream journal, to record inner images and patterns. This act of paying attention to the symbolic life trains the psyche to listen. When outer events later echo those symbols, the mind is ready to recognize the alignment. Without that attentiveness, the event slips by as random noise. With it, it becomes a message. The second step is humility. Synchronicity does not answer to our will. It arrives in its own time. To approach life with openness, to accept that meaning may reveal itself unexpectedly, is to step into a posture of receptivity. Jung described this as cultivating an attitude of symbolic living, where we treat events not only as functional, but as potentially meaningful. This does not mean forcing meaning onto everything, but remaining sensitive to resonance. The bird outside your window is not always a symbol, but sometimes, at the right moment, it is. Third, synchronicity responds to inner readiness. Jung observed that the more an individual is engaged in genuine psychological work, facing their shadow, listening to their dreams, striving toward individuation, the more synchronicities tend to cluster. It is as if the unconscious, stirred into activity, begins to spill outward into the world. Transformation within creates ripples without. Thus, cultivating depth in the inner life also invites synchronicities into the outer. There are also practices that nurture this openness. Reflecting on symbols, keeping journals, meditating, walking in nature, all help quiet the rational chatter and attune us to subtle echoes. By slowing down, we create space for the psyche to notice alignments. Many people report that synchronicities appear most often in stillness, when the mind is uncluttered, when one is listening rather than demanding. In those moments, the whispers of meaning can be heard. Synchronicity also requires discernment. Jung cautioned against seeing signs everywhere, which can lead to paranoia or magical thinking. Not every coincidence carries depth. The key is whether it resonates with your inner state, whether it shifts your perception, whether it leaves a lasting imprint on your journey. If it does, it may be synchronicity. If it does not, it remains coincidence. This discernment protects us from inflation and keeps synchronicity grounded in genuine meaning. To live with awareness of synchronicity is to live as if the world is alive with conversation. Each day becomes an invitation. Encounters are not just chance, they are potential signs. Dreams are not just noise, they are signals. Repetitions and patterns are not just quirks, they may be threads in a tapestry. Life begins to feel participatory, as though the cosmos is not indifferent but responsive. This shift does not remove suffering, but it transforms it, giving even pain a place in a larger order. Imagine living in this way. You keep your inner life alive through reflection and creativity. You remain attentive to outer events without demanding miracles. Slowly, synchronicities emerge, moments of alignment that guide, reassure, and challenge. Over time, you begin to trust the dialogue. You feel less alone, more woven into the living fabric of meaning. Synchronicity ceases to be anomaly. It becomes a mode of existence, a way of being attuned to the mystery that surrounds us. This cultivation of openness does not guarantee that life will be easy. It does, however, deepen our capacity to see. And when we see, we realize that synchronicity is not a foreign intrusion, but a glimpse into the underlying symphony of life. That symphony, Jung suggested, is what synchronicity ultimately points to, the hidden coherence of existence, where psyche and cosmos are joined in one music. To arrive there is to glimpse the deepest truth of synchronicity. And so, we now turn to the final vision, life itself as a hidden symphony, where every note, dream, event, relationship, symbol, plays in harmony with the larger score. This is where Jung's idea reaches its most profound conclusion and where we end our journey. To follow Jung's vision to its deepest point is to see synchronicity not as isolated events, but as windows into a hidden symphony that underlies all of life. Every dream, every coincidence, every meaningful encounter is like a note in a composition too vast for us to hear in its entirety. We live within the music, often deaf to its harmony, But in moments of synchronicity, the melody breaks through. Suddenly we glimpse that life is not random noise, but a woven score in which our own story plays a part. Jung often used the metaphor of the unus mundus, the one world, a concept from alchemy describing the unity of psyche and matter. For him, synchronicity was evidence of this unity. When the inner and the outer line up in uncanny ways, they reveal that they are not truly separate. They are two expressions of the same underlying order, just as melody and harmony are two aspects of the same piece of music. We may hear only fragments, but the coherence is real. The scarab, the fish, the mandalas in Pauli's dreams, each was a momentary breakthrough of this hidden order. They were glimpses into the great design, moments when the veil lifted and the symphony became audible. To live with awareness of synchronicity is to accept that our lives are part of this design, even when we cannot trace the full pattern. Meaning is not a rare guest, but the very fabric of existence. When we see life in this way, despair softens. If events are only random, suffering feels senseless. But if events participate in a larger tapestry, even pain acquires dimension. The loss of a loved one, the failure of a plan, the shock of crisis, all may later be understood as threads that contribute to a deeper pattern. Synchronicities often appear in the midst of such trials, reminding us that the music is still being played, that what feels like chaos may be part of a hidden harmony. This is not to romanticize suffering or to claim that every detail is predestined. Jung never argued for fatalism. Instead, he proposed that synchronicity offers glimpses, moments when we recognize that meaning exists, even if we do not fully grasp it. These glimpses sustain us. They provide orientation, like hearing a familiar theme in a complex piece of music. They remind us that the universe is not indifferent, that psyche and cosmos move together in ways beyond cause and effect. In relationships, synchronicity reveals the threads connecting lives across space and time. In dreams, it reveals how symbols link the individual to the collective unconscious. In crises, it appears as a beacon of guidance. In ordinary days, it whispers through repetitions, chance encounters, and timely words. Everywhere, it reminds us that life is participatory, that we are not merely spectators but players in the unfolding score. As we contemplate this hidden symphony, we recognize that synchronicity does more than comfort. It demands something of us. It asks us to listen, to pay attention, to treat our lives with reverence. When we notice the alignments, when we honor the meaning, we participate consciously in the music. We become not just subjects of fate, but co-creators in the dance between inner and outer worlds. This, perhaps, is the ultimate gift of Jung's idea. He did not present synchronicity as superstition or as a loophole in causality. He offered it as a vision of wholeness, a reminder that psyche and matter are not estranged, but kin. To live with that awareness is to live with depth, with humility, and with wonder. For in every moment, the cosmos may be speaking, not with words, but with coincidences that resonate in the soul. And so we end where we began, with the scarab tapping at Jung's window. It was not just an insect, it was a messenger from the Hidden Symphony, a reminder that meaning flows through the veins of life itself. The same is true for you. The next time you encounter a coincidence that pierces your heart, pause. Listen. The universe may be playing your note in the great song of existence. Synchronicity reminds us that life is not a sterile machine grinding out random outcomes, but a living dialogue between psyche and cosmos. Jung insisted that to reduce everything to causality is to blind ourselves to the poetry of existence. The Scarab story, the dreams of Pauli, the countless reports of ordinary people. These are not accidents to be dismissed. They are revelations, fragments of the hidden score. When we learn to recognize synchronicity, we shift from seeing life as chaos to seeing it as conversation. Every symbol, every repetition, every uncanny encounter becomes a potential line of dialogue in the conversation between the individual and the whole. We are not abandoned in a silent universe. We are participants in an unfolding meaning, one that transcends us yet includes us. This awareness changes how we live. It encourages attentiveness, listening not only to dreams, but to the subtle signs of the day. It cultivates humility, acknowledging that meaning comes not from our control, but from our participation in a larger order. It inspires courage, reminding us that even in darkness, the symphony continues, and our suffering is not without place in its unfolding. Most of all, synchronicity restores wonder. In a world often flattened by statistics, utility, and routine, it reawakens the sense that reality is enchanted. To encounter a synchronicity is to glimpse the sacred woven into the ordinary, to feel the pulse of mystery in the midst of daily life. It tells us that we are not alone, that the universe itself is in dialogue with our souls. The next time you face a turning point, or wrestle with despair, or simply notice a symbol repeating in your life, remember Jung's insight. Do not dismiss it as mere chance. Pause, listen, and ask, what is life saying to me? Synchronicity may not give you answers in the language of logic, but it will give you something deeper. The assurance that your journey is meaningful, that your story is part of a greater whole. Carl Jung never claimed to have solved the mystery of synchronicity. He knew it was not a formula, but a revelation, not a doctrine, but an invitation. An invitation to live as if life is alive with meaning, as if every moment holds the potential for dialogue between the human soul and the cosmos. To accept that invitation is to step into the symphony consciously, to let its hidden harmonies shape the way you walk, love, suffer, and hope. Perhaps this is the true secret of synchronicity. It does not merely happen to us, it awakens us. It calls us to live with reverence, with openness, and with trust in the unseen order that binds psyche and cosmos together. And in that trust, we discover that the universe is not a stranger, but a companion, one that speaks not in words, but in coincidences glowing with meaning. So when the next unlikely alignment arrives in your life, remember, it may be the scarab at your window, the universe reminding you that you are part of its hidden song.